Okay, good morning. Happy Friday. I am Jennifer Restrepo, Director of Accreditation here in the Office of Academic Planning and Accountability. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to our inaugural assessment conference. We're very glad that you chose to spend your Friday here with us. I believe we have a wonderful agenda for you today, so thank you so much again for coming. It is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Keston Fulcher from James Madison University. At JMU, Dr. Fulcher is the Executive Director of the Center for Assessment and Research Studies, and he is also an Associate Professor in Graduate Psychology. Under Dr. Fulcher's leadership, JMU has received an unprecedented 10 national awards or recognitions related to student learning outcomes assessment. Dr. Fulcher's research focuses on structuring higher education to better demonstrate learning improvement. He has presented across the country about learning improvement, and he has written an occasional paper on this topic for the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment. Needless to say, Dr. Fulcher is an expert in his field, and we are thrilled that he is here with us today to share his knowledge with us. So please help me welcome Dr. Fulcher.
Jennifer, thank you for that nice introduction. It's great to be here in Miami. The last time I was here was something like 1985. My dad worked here, and I was probably wearing some sort of turquoise shirt or something like that. Those were the times, right? But it's great to be back in Miami, and it's great to be here at Florida International University. And thanks for spending your morning with me. And so the topic here we're going to talk about is learning improvement. And this is a workshop, it's not just a lecture, so we'll have a lot of activities that you'll have an opportunity to play around with some of these ideas. And also, you might notice there's a pig up there on the projection. And so the reason the pig is up there is that I wrote a paper a few years ago. It's called A Simple Model for Learning Improvement, Weigh Pig, Feed Pig, Weigh Pig. And so as the workshop goes on, I'll tell you a little bit more about that. So right now, that's just a little bit of a teaser, like why the heck is there a pig up there and what does it have to do with learning improvement? Okay. So I'd like to start off with a little bit of a meet and greet, and we'll do this at the tables. And I know you all are all from the same university, so many of you all know each other and probably know people around the table. So the first two parts are easy, but the last one is a little bit more difficult. So I'm going to start that last piece, that third part of the introductions, by asking a couple questions. So the first question is, how many of you all deal with students on a frequent basis? Okay. How many of you all are instructional faculty? Okay, so about the same, all right? So if you will, I want you to close your eyes for just a minute. So I want you to think about students that you work with a lot. Now, I want you to think about times when you've been disappointed about their knowledge, their skills, or their attitudes. And I want you to single in on one of those areas. Now I'm going to ask another question. What would it take for your students to be better at that area that you just identified? So keep your eyes closed for about another minute just to think about that. Again, a knowledge, skill, or behavior that you're disappointed with respect to your students' performance. What would it take to get them to be where you would like them to be? Okay, let's come back. And so that's the third piece of your introduction. So I'd like you to talk with folks around your table and say your name, if people don't know you, what you do at FIU, and then the last one, share that area that you're disappointed with their performance, and then talk about your ideas about what it would take to get students to be better at that particular area, okay? And if you're at a table by yourself, you might want to join some other folks so it's a conversation. Give you about 5 minutes. Okay, I think that was a minute. It sounds like a really great conversation over there. Maybe if I can start out with you all, I'd like 2 or 3 examples of some areas of learning that you all were thinking about. And so can somebody volunteer to tell us your area of learning that you hope can be improved and how it might be done?
My pet peeve is these millennials. They want everything given to them. Is that on the test? What's the answer to that? And I said, no. Nutrition, that's where I am, is something that's cumulative, and you have to think on your feet, and you're going to have to interact with doctors, nurses, Indian chiefs, and all that. And you have to just absorb everything. So everything in every textbook is relevant, and they don't want to learn that way. So my thing is motivating them.
I have a slightly different problem. I teach first-year students a lot in an environmental science course, and it is hybrid, which is a very complex type of format. They have to go back and forth between online and classroom. And what I find challenging, I feel like the mother nag, because I send out announcements, I put everything down step by step, I ask them in class, I put up slides in class, and I still find that students, they don't read the instructions, they come to class, they're unprepared, but they're genuinely interested, but they just cannot maneuver the mechanics of all the steps that it takes to be successful in this kind of class.
Did everybody hear those 2 great examples? What's funny about them, too, is they're not the typical knowledge or skill set that you might think that would be focusing on higher ed, but they're more, in one case, they're affective, sort of the motivational piece. And the other end, this is more of a kind of a meta skill about how to navigate a course environment, right? So those are 2 very interesting examples. Let's have a couple more. Do y'all have an example you'd like to share? Yeah, please.
We had a long discussion about writing and not being really ready for college in terms of their writing ability in all of our disciplines, which are completely different. So we did not get to a good answer. This is something we've been struggling for a long time. We were trying to diagnose what the issue is. Is it that they don't read? Is it a millennial issue? Is it a socioeconomic issue? Language barrier issue? Lots of issues, but we couldn't come to a conclusion on to how to fix it.
Yeah, so there's an old saying, what's that, like, what's certain in life? Death, taxes, and higher ed, bad writing, right? Like almost, no matter what school you're at or what program, faculty typically complain about writing. Okay, thank you for sharing that. But that's the question, though, like, you're not satisfied with it, then what's the strategy? Like, how do you actually approach that situation so students can write better? Very challenging. Let's get one more. Thank you so much.
One issue that we were discussing is she mentioned the students do not read the syllabus. I'll go a little bit more and say they don't read anything that we post for them to read. So that's a challenge. We give them an assignment. They're supposed to come prepared, and there they are. They're not prepared. They're not ready. They didn't read anything. I post videos. They don't watch the videos. They don't read the thing. So I don't know what to do. I need a strategy, by the way.
Jose, thanks for helping me. That's another technique that I learned. I taught a learning strategies class many years ago, and one of the techniques is wait time. You know, if you ask a question, somebody doesn't respond, just wait. Somebody will eventually pipe up. So, Jose, thanks for saving me there. So, yeah, thanks for sharing all these stories. So there's a lot of different ways or areas that we can help students improve. So some of them may be attitudinal, as was said over there in that table. Some of them can be more sort of a traditional skill set, like writing. And then also there's sort of this meta skill set, too, to say, hey, as professors, we think these materials are important. You know, why aren't you reading it? You know, what's the disconnect there, right? At this time, it's probably also good to mention that most of the examples I'm going to give here are from the academic side. So it's about student learning, but most of the general principles can be applied to administrative units as well. So there's a few spots here where I'll try to translate to say, okay, let's imagine this were an administrative example and what it might look like. Okay, so a little bit about what we're doing. So the morning, so this workshop, we're going to be talking about learning improvement. And so we'll be going into a little bit of depth in terms of conceptually, what does learning improvement mean? How can we think about it? And you might be interested because you're thinking, this is an assessment guy. Why is he talking about all this improvement? Well, it's because I'm tired of doing assessment where I'm just getting numbers all the time and spitting them out and nothing's done with them. So I would like to put out ways that assessment can partner with other groups on campus to improve things. Then a little bit later, we've got all kinds of breakout sessions. So I think in front of you is a paper. I'll be doing 2 of those breakout sessions. So one of them will be differentiating assessment reports. And so in that, what I do is I provide 4 examples of assessment reports going from really, really bad to amazing. And we'll look at them one at a time, and then you can critique yourself about what makes one report better than the one before it. So it's kind of nice to actually see it all together. Then I'll also be talking about something called program theory. I'll mention it just for like 30 seconds in this workshop, but later in the breakout session, we'll spend more time with it. So this is an area that once you hear about it, you're thinking, gosh, it's common sense, but oftentimes we don't talk about it in higher ed. Just a quick show of hands, how many of you all have heard about program theory? Okay, maybe I got a half finger up there, so not a whole lot. So anyway, if you're interested, please join me in the breakout session. Okay, so the outcome. So after you finish this workshop, here's some things that I would like you to know, think, or do. So one of them is describe the prevalence of examples of learning improvement across the nation, or lack thereof. Second, explain the various definitions of use of assessment results. People talk about that a lot, using assessment results. But if you think about it a little bit, what exactly does that mean? How do you use results? Third, explain the model of improved learning. I'll give you a hint. It's weigh pig, feed pig, weigh pig. That's a simple model. But I'll also give you a little bit more sophisticated models too. And I'll also talk about the potential barriers to improving learning. Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, so all these slides are going to be shared with you. And in fact, I have a Dropbox that I'll share with you that's got all kinds of materials that goes into a lot more depth about all of these. So you'll have plenty of materials. Thank you for saying that. Okay. So the main goal really is to facilitate programmatic learning improvement on your campus. This could also be improving some of the processes and administrative units. So that's what we're trying to do. Okay. So I'm going to introduce learning improvement and talking about it as a national example. So how many of you all have seen an assessment cycle before? Okay. So it's about half the hands go up. So typically when assessment is talked about, they said these are the different areas that you need to fill out in a report. And assessment cycles differ from school to school, and so my assessment cycle might differ a little bit from FIU's, but these are the general steps that are taken. So I'm going to walk through them. So the first, at the very top, you see where it says create outcomes? So that's creating, from the academic side, student learning outcomes. From administrative side, it's usually what do you want to accomplish? So they're more like structural goals. The second piece is aligning curriculum. So at the beginning, you stated your student learning outcomes. What do you want students to know, think, or do as a function of your program? The second part is, well, how are you going to help those students learn those things? So that's the curriculum piece. That is the intervention that helps you, theoretically, hit those student learning outcomes. The next step is select or develop measures. So this is figuring out, for example, tests that would be able to capture that student learning. Next part is the bottom. So that's 6 o'clock is data collection. So once you've created an instrument or you've selected an instrument, then you collect data on it. Fourth, data analysis and interpretation. And then the last piece is use of results. So the idea is you're saying what you want students to know, think, or do. You're telling us, like, what are the interventions that you were doing in your program to help students get there. And then the other steps, the measures, the data collection, and the analysis and interpretation are all methodological pieces to indicate the degree that students actually met those student learning outcomes. Is everybody with me? And so the last part is use of results. So that's the promise, and you notice I've got use of results in a little bit different color there. But the reality is, it oftentimes ends up as an assessment report. That's sort of a bureaucratic exercise to make sure that we've got things in the box. Now, I say that because that was also my reality for a long time. Like, man, I am helping out these programs a lot doing their assessment. And then when I look and see, well, has student learning improved at all in these programs as a function of doing this assessment? Having a really hard time finding examples. So this is not only a local issue for JMU, it's really a national issue. So can everybody see that quote there? I'll let you read it. So this is a quote from George Koo, and if you're familiar with NSSE, the National Survey of Student Engagement, George Koo is one of the main authors of NSSE. But what's interesting there is he was saying it is rare for people to basically take actions on results, but even rarer still was to go back and see if those changes actually made a difference. So I want to go a little bit more. Some more stories. Okay, this is a study done by Tridi Banta and colleagues. So Tridi Banta, you might think of her as like the godmother of assessment. So she's been doing assessment practice in higher ed since the late 70s. Sort of began the field of higher ed assessment. And she and some colleagues wanted to do a study. So what they did is they talked to all these universities around the country and said, send us your best assessment report. And what they were looking for is to see, out of those assessment reports, did they in fact have that student learning improvement? She could only find 6%. Now that's 6%, and for those methodologists in the room, I know there's at least a couple of them, maybe more, is this a random sample of programs across the nation? These were the very best examples. So in my estimation, there are far fewer than 1% of examples where you can find learning improvement within a program. Like, that's not great, because as an assessment professional, one of the ways that I sell assessment is to say, it's going to help you with learning improvement. Well, the evidence ain't so great, is it? 6%. So this is an opportunity, too, where I want you to think, pair, and share. Have y'all done that before, think, pair, share? Okay. So what I'd like you to do is spend about 2 or 3 minutes just by yourself writing out ideas. Why is that the case? Why is it so rare to see evidence of learning improvement in higher ed? Okay, so spend about 3 minutes on that question. Why is it so rare? Okay, does anybody or any table want to volunteer one of their reasons that there's this case for an underuse of assessment, particularly for learning improvement. What's the case? Why do we see so little learning improvement? Okay. Okay, two.
I'm one of these students who was always in the front row, raising. Well, the first thing you start off is we're not measuring the right thing. And so we don't have good learning objectives. Some of the syllabi have none whatsoever. And then we're not measuring the proper things. So we may well see where there may be improvement going on because there's feedback going on, but we just don't see it.
Thanks. So yeah, there's two important pieces that were brought up there. One is, have we articulated what it is that we want students to learn well? And then B, maybe there's a concern with the measure. Maybe the measure doesn't map on to the things that we think are important. Did I capture that accurately? Okay, great, thank you. Somebody else? Hold on just 1 second. She'll get the microphone to you.
Our table had a great discussion around baseline measures not having been determined to truly compare for improvement. And so it's important to know where you're starting so you can know what you're comparing to denote the improvements that you see.
Yeah, thanks so much. Is it EK? Yeah, EK, thank you. In fact, this table back here had the same conversation. So the idea is to say, man, we might have made a lot of changes, and then we assess afterwards. But if we don't have a baseline by which to compare, then it's difficult to know if those changes actually had the improvement that we wanted. Is that accurate? Yeah, thank you. So those are two really great comments. Somebody else want to give a reason for the lack of learning improvement? Oh, good. Yeah, I love it. I love it. Yeah, expose them.
So we talked a little bit about human behavior and how faculty or people in general are typically resistant to change. So when you see results that are discouraging, or it's easier to blame the other, to blame the student or to complain about the students, and it's the student's issue rather than an issue with the pedagogy or the skill in teaching. And also people are tired, and it takes a lot of effort to do assessment right and to implement what you've learned from that assessment. I think that, yeah. And often we get results or we get student feedback and we don't know what happens to it. And those students leave and there's not really a closing the loop that happens and that students can see so that they feel that they've been heard.
Yeah, great comments. I think we can all agree that the learning environment that we're in is really complicated. It's a system, right? There are students that go in it. What we hope is that they get a lot of, they grow, they get information, they get new skills. And a lot of it's on them, right? It's what do they come to the table with? How hard do they try? How well do they read their assignments? How much time do they study and so forth? But there's also the structural part of it too. So, how was the program put together? How well did the faculty coordinate together? And so that's a piece of the system as well. So one of the things that I've been thinking about is my mind was really on that. Remember that cycle that I showed you? My mind was like, that was just ingrained in my mind about how to think about learning. And now I think much more about like a learning systems perspective. So assessment is just one component to it. So thank you for the comments. Anybody else? Yeah, you'll know I'll wait, right? Wait time is my thing, right? No, it's not. Okay, sure. Oh, sure. Yeah, thank you. So thanks for that comment. So when you speak on the microphone, just say your name and the unit you're associated with. Thanks so much. Leading by example. Thanks, Deborah. Awesome. Okay. So thanks for spending this time to sort of tee up what learning improvement is. And so a lot of my thought about learning improvement is to think that maybe it's been reframed, or maybe it's been framed incorrectly. So how can we reframe it to make more sense of it? And so one of the concerns that I saw was this issue of change versus improvement and really sloppy language. Actually, I'm gonna skip over this piece. Let me just go to the next one. So let me talk about change and improvement, and I'm going to give you a quiz first, okay? Because this is going to hopefully get some discussion around what's the difference between change and improvement. So here's the pop quiz. So I'm going to let you read this, and you have to decide, is this a change or is this an improvement with respect to learning, okay? So read this, then talk amongst yourself and see what you think. Is it a change or is it an improvement? So feel free to share your hypotheses with your table mates. Okay, I am looking for some fearless volunteers. Okay, I heard a change. Okay, change. Can you get a microphone real fast? Just give me your rationale for why you think it's a change. If you can say your name and the unit you're with, please.
Jit Sengupta, College of Business. I think this is something that we were discussing in our table before. When faculty see that there is, the data is not showing the correct results, the blame is always on the instrument, and they want to change the instrument to see if the results change. But that's not making any changes to the curriculum, any improvements being made. So I think that's why it's a change.
Great. Thank you. Does anybody want to disagree with him? Going once, twice, sold. I love auctions, by the way. I'm a big comic book collector, so I do auctions all the time. Okay, so I agree. Okay, here's the case where what's happening is it's a change. It's actually not a change to the learning environment per se. It's only a change to the methodology, in this case, the instrument. Is everybody with me there? In fact, we couldn't even say it's an improvement to the assessment methodology because you have to know if the reliability got better, right? Are you with me? So what happens a lot of times in that final step of the assessment process, use of results, a lot of times people will just put, here's the change that we made to the assessment process. I'm not saying that's bad, right? Sometimes we need to do that. Like Indeed, our instruments aren't what we want them to be. So we need to work on the instruments. But just by tweaking a rubric, is that going to make student learning better? It's not. It might be a step in the entire process that you need, but that by itself is not going to do it. Okay, so now I'm going to put up another example. Again, you know the routine now. Is it change or improvement? Okay, we figured it. No. Okay, second. So let you read this, and again, when you're comfortable, start speaking with your colleagues at your table. Okay, this one seems a little more controversial. I'm hearing improvement, probably more than change, but hearing some change as well. Does anybody want to make the argument for improvement?
My name is L. Panye Hudson, E.K. Hudson, am in human resources, not a teacher or an academician. And we see improvement in the methodology, but there's not evidence unless it's after that class. There may be more information there. Okay, but improvement in the methodology, but we have no evidence that guitar performance has actually improved by the students' performance.
So I think you started off with change or with improvement, but then you argue that it's actually a change. Okay, no evidence of improvement of the student's performance. Yes.
So it looks like it's Deborah Hassan, College of Arts, Sciences, and Education. It looks like an improvement to the curriculum and the course, but we still have yet to see if there's going to be student improvement. So it's an improvement to the curriculum, but from the perspective of student learning, it's still a change, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's what EK was saying as well. Oh, yeah. Any other perspectives? Okay. So this was mixed, and I'm going to say no, it's not an improvement, but it's merely a change, right? And the reason being there is, in this case, as compared to the last one, there's actually significant modifications to the curriculum. Now, the degree to which we know those modifications were actually successful, we don't know, right? So let's do one more. Does everybody agree with me on that, by the way? Okay, but this is tough. This is what trips up a lot of people. They will say this is an improvement, but I would argue it's just a change to the learning environment. Okay, so improvement or not, we're going to say not. So here's another example. It's actually a tie-in to the last example, so I'll let you read it. Okay, we'll do this as a group. Is this an improvement now? Yeah. Okay, now I know there's some methodologists in this room, and suspend all disbelief here, okay? Assume the methodology is actually good. Just in terms of the general formatting, this is actually an improvement, right? So they got a baseline about where they were at one time. They made some really strategic changes to the learning environment, and then they reassessed, and they saw that student learning got better. Now, to the degree that we can say there's a cause and effect, that is, that change to the curriculum resulted in that learning improvement, that's where we're trying to be. So just to kind of take it all back, oh, I have a great slide to show you. Yeah, we're real happy now, right? We finally got to improvement. I was like, God, it took you through a long journey to get there. But so that's the issue, right? Is you got to assess, then you have to intervene effectively, and then you have to reassess. And it's only when you have that reassessment shows more learning than the baseline can you say that change was actually an improvement. Okay? So I'd actually like you all to spend about 2 or 3 minutes just saying that to each other. What is the difference between a change and improvement? Explain it to each other at the table. Okay? Just so you can practice at it. Okay, does everybody feel comfortable now with the difference between a change and an improvement? Okay. I'm going to officially deputize you now to be improvement police. That is, when you're listening to conversations on campus, and when people say improvement, just to say, what do you mean by improvement? And see if they're actually talking about this kind of improvement, where there's the baseline, the intervention, and the reassessment. I mean, they might have done a strategic change, and there's nothing wrong with a strategic change. Sometimes, for all kinds of reasons, you might not be able to have the methodology to actually see improvement. I get that. But don't bastardize the term improvement when it's merely a change. On that note, let's take a 10-minute break, and I'll see you all in a few minutes. Okay, so I know y'all are feeling pretty good about yourself, newly deputized as improvement policemen, right? So let's go into a little bit more detail about improvement. And so I'm going to talk about the simple model, and that's weigh pig, feed pig, weigh pig. So I started this presentation with a teaser to say, I'm going to talk about a pig and improvement. What the heck do those two things have to do with one another? So I'm going to take you back to, I think it was 2005 or 2006, and I was at a state meeting, and there were a lot of high-level administrators around the table talking to state administrators. They were talking about these new guidelines for assessment across the state. So I'm a young assessment practitioner at that time, and I'm kind of listening in, and this provost from a very well-known school in Virginia speaks up, and he's speaking up sort of against assessment. And he says, I come from an agricultural background, and we have this old saying, and that is, a pig never fattened because it was weighed. Right? You bring your pig to the market, you want that pig to weigh as much as it can so you can get money for it. It's usually you sell the pig by the pound. And so everybody was laughing at that, and I'm an assessment person, and I was like, gosh, that's a good one, you know? I was like, yeah, you're right. And so I just kept thinking about that quote over and over and over again for about 10 years. And so then when some graduate students and I were asked to write a paper about learning improvement, I was thinking about it. I kept thinking about that quote, a pig never fattened because it was weighed. Then I thought, well, maybe if you weigh the pig first, then you feed the pig something more nutritious or more food, and then you reweigh and the pig weighs more, well then, maybe that's a way to put that weighing of the pig into a bigger construct. Is everybody with me there? So that's where we came up with weigh pig, feed pig, weigh pig. And it is probably the most ridiculous title that has ever been in one of those NILOA occasional papers, but it sticks with people, right? Like a treatise on learning improvement, boring, nobody reads that. But when you put a pig in there, everybody likes the pig. So that's where we came up with weigh pig, feed pig, weigh pig. And that's the real simple model. And that's what we talked about too, that difference between a change and an improvement. And so at this point, I'm going to break it down a little bit more for you as well. So I'm going to go into different ways of thinking about the simple model and also get a little bit more complex with the models. Okay, so in essence, this is one way that weigh pig, feed pig, weigh pig could be manifested. And this is the same as the last example that you saw with the steel guitar as well, right? So you can assess student learning at graduation, and then you make a change within the program. And then if you were to assess a subsequent cohort, and that cohort did indeed do better on that student learning outcome, then you could say that that change is actually an improvement. Again, I understand that there's a lot of complicated methodology that goes underneath it. We're not going to go into that piece right now. Okay. So one of the areas in that piece that we want to talk about is the components that actually get you ready for improvement, and also issues with how the model can break down. So some of the readiness component is, in our opinion, whether it's an academic area or an administrative area, you got to have a faculty or staff nucleus who actually want to improve something. What I vastly underestimated when I initially worked in improvement was the social dynamics that were involved. If the faculty or staff don't want to improve something, it's really hard to make them want to improve it. There's also this issue of trying to work together on something. So if you're trying to make an improvement at the program level, that means that you want all students from that program to be affected by the change. To do that requires a tremendous amount of coordination. There also has to be support from administration. Like, for example, if there's confusion about what change and improvement mean, that's a concern. So you have to make people have that mindset. Also providing strategic resources. So And there's a lot of different ways to think about these resources, but one is this. Imagine that you're in a unit and you have to get 10 different people involved for the intervention to be effective. Even if those folks want to work together, they're going to need not 30 minutes to collaborate. They're going to need days oftentimes to get together to strategize. That's something that's often missing, is this time for really smart people to get together to strategize about these things. That's one thing at JMU we realized. They were like, man, we're asking people to do this really tough stuff, and we're giving them half an hour to think about it. That's not going to happen. Then the assessment methodology, right? That they have to have it implemented before and after intervention. This is one of the trickiest pieces about improvement, is that you have to have a good enough definition in your head and a good enough instrumentation before you intervene to get that baseline. And then you also have to have results to provide valid information with respect to the targeted learning outcome. That's not easy either. So there's a lot of things that have to go right just to be ready for the improvement process. Again, breaking it down a little bit, there's also the planning for an intervention. So the things you have to think about when you're trying to intervene. So a few of those. What is the learning objective or student learning outcome that you're trying to change? By the way, this is not a trivial task. In the best learning improvement projects I've worked on, folks would spend a semester just pounding out exactly what they mean by, say, writing. This table before was saying, hey, we're concerned about student writing. But if you ask the different faculty in that program, I'm just saying hypothetically, what do you mean by good writing? You're probably going to get 10 different answers with respect to what that is. And so to have enough time to sort of iterate towards a definition of good writing that everybody can live with, it's hard to do. And I say live with because amongst faculty, you're probably not going to get everybody to say, I agree 100% with that. But can you get to the point where you can say, you know what, that's reasonable, and if we adopted that, in fact, it'd probably be helpful for everybody involved. Let me go down to, for identification too. If you're going to spend the time to try to improve something, make sure it's an important area within your program. So there's some things actually that's probably not that hard to improve. Like for example, if, man, you know what, our students are really struggling with these 10 vocabulary words. I bet there's a lot of things you could do in your program to help them improve those 10 vocabulary words pretty fast. And you may indeed want to do those things, but in terms of that being the focus of your program and a lot of time spent, that's probably not it. But writing, for example, now that's a wicked area to try to improve. And if you'd agree that that's an area that your graduates would be a lot better off if they were better writers, then maybe that's the kind of thing you want to work on. Also, too, I'm just going back to the back table. They were talking about those, like the meta skills of like being able to navigate the work stuff. That's pretty important too. That not only helps with one class, but probably all their classes. Another piece too with the identification is referencing assessment results. So if you do have some good information, it's also nice to say, look, our students are underperforming here and we can show it. And underperformance is a relative thing. It's relative to the expectations that the faculty have. Okay, investigation. Remember, we're talking about interventions eventually. You have to do something different. You have to feed the pig something different or something more nutritious in order for it to grow. So investigate the curriculum map. Like, does the curriculum map you have, does that accurately represent the types of actions that are currently being taken to help students receive that student learning outcome? If that's the case, then why aren't students meeting your expectations? There's a lot of questions to be asked. The third piece is actually the proposed learning modifications. And if you can see the relationship between investigate and proposed learning modifications, I think too often that we launch in to try to make changes to the program without having a good understanding of the as-is curriculum. So after we understand what's going on, then what interventions do we think are going to positively affect those student learning outcomes? Questions are, will they affect all students? And are the interventions strong enough, long enough? Again, if you're going that program thing, it's not one section that's going to change student learning outcomes for the entire program, it's often many different courses, the sections involved in tying them together. And the last, are the interventions strong enough and long enough? Let me ask you this question. Has your program or have you been posed with a solution and it seemed like a quick fix to a really tough problem that wasn't going to work? Most people probably have had that experience. I'll give you one at JMU. So multicultural competence is a really important student learning outcome at JMU. And as we looked at the curriculum about what we're doing for multicultural competence, again, this is across the curriculum, it was like our biggest intervention was, it was called Conversations About Diversity, really well thought out, and it was an hour and 15-minute session on talking about diversity, okay? Again, really good intervention, but in an hour and 15 minutes, are you really going to change students' competency on multiculturalism? That was one issue. The second issue is that that intervention hit about 300 students per year. We've got 20,000. So do y'all see that? Y'all see how there's a couple issues there. One, this intervention, even if well-designed, is not strong enough or long enough to have the desired effect. And then B, the way it's implemented is to too few people as well. Okay. So the last piece here, what this is sort of thinking through the steps of learning improvement, is laying out the improvement timetable. So in macro steps is thinking about the administration of the pre-assessment, the intervention or dosage across cohorts, and the administration of post-assessment. I think these two are, I mean, they're complicated, but they're fairly easy to figure out. I think this was the one that folks have the most challenge with, is the intervention dosage across cohorts. And as somebody who's worked on a lot of institutional reports, one thing that I see frequently is an institution will say, we're trying to improve students' writing skills, and then they'll come up with a couple of examples of cool things that happen in a few different classes across campus and say, that's how we're doing writing across campus. But if you actually looked under the hood, you would see those classes affect so few students relative to the issue that it's not, it's really not, the dosage is all wrong. It's not hitting all the students. It's probably not in the right degree either. So I think, ma'am, what's your name back there? Yeah. Pat? Yeah, so Pat's in healthcare. This is an issue they talk about a lot. It's kind of like the dosage and the interventions and getting out there. I think dosage is a kind of a good analogy with respect to getting interventions out to students. Okay. So let me just go back here. So these are the steps that you have to think through with learning improvement. And I'm giving you all like just 2 levels of an outline. This can go really, really deep. But it's thinking about identification, investigation, proposing learning modifications, and laying out an improvement timetable. So that's just getting ready for the structure of what you would do for learning improvement. I'll give you a trick here too, because you might think, oh my God, Keston, this is so overwhelming. I couldn't imagine having to do this for every student learning outcome in my program. I don't know if any of you all were thinking that. One of my suggestions for a program, pick one student learning outcome that you think is super important, that you think that students would really benefit from, and plan it out for 3 or 4 years. I think one of the mistakes that we make in the assessment world is there's often a box that says, how are you changing the curriculum or whatever for every single student learning outcome? What you're going to end up having is a bunch of superficial changes to a lot of things that don't really affect the outcomes. Strategically, you're much better off picking one thing and focusing on as a faculty, how would you change it over time? Now, by the way, some folks at SAC-COC and accreditors disagree with me on that. They think you need to improve everything all the time. I was like, improving everything all the time means you improve what? Nothing, right? Okay, so let's go back. So I kind of laid out the readiness piece. We're going back to the simple model again. And so now you have that context about the readiness piece. I want to talk about in macro steps how this model can break down, and you're all going to help me with this. So here's maybe the biggest problem with the learning improvement model. So to give you context here, I've got a class that graduated in 2004, and by the way, they all these students in this class took a writing assessment, and the rubric is a holistic rubric, and it's graded on 4 points. So 1 is beginning, 2 is developing, 3 good, and 4 excellent. And so the students graduating from the program are 2.5. It means they are between developing and good. They haven't reached the good threshold yet. And so for this particular program, we'll call it history. You know, writing is an important student learning outcome in history. For this history program, the faculty, you know, they're saying this is okay, and then they don't do anything differently in this case. So what do you think the results are going to be in 2017? Could be better. Could be worse. Okay. In this mythical situation of perfect methodology, assuming both cohorts are the same, what do you think? Okay. Yeah, and thanks for going along with the methodology piece here, because our whole area, I teach in a PhD program in assessment and measurement. We have a lot of methodologists on our staff, but we can get into the weeds with methodology so much that we're not seeing the big picture. Okay. So in this case, y'all are right. Let's see, come on. Yeah, writing score 2.5. So that's the biggest, or one of the big ways that the learning improvement model can break down, right? If you assess PIG, don't do anything differently, assess PIG again, it's going to weigh the same. Let's give another example of how it can break down. Okay, this is uncoordinated or misapplied interventions. So this time, same deal. Faculty see the 2.5, but this time they want to do something different about it. But they meet for half an hour and they say, let's improve writing. Go forth and do it your own way. So what do you think is going to happen here? Yeah, statistics go up and down. Again, we're in this utopian methodological world. And you know, maybe you'll see a little difference, but in my case, average writing score is the same. It's the case that we talked over here. We've got 10 different faculty who define good writing differently, who are going to have 10 different techniques about how to work on writing. Okay. How about this? Unrealistic time frame for improvement. Okay, this might be the case where the faculty get together and they say, we're really going to work on writing. They even coordinate what they're going to do together. But they think it could be done in a year. What's going to happen? Probably nothing much again. Right? And this is also a big misconception with improvement. The way our assessment cycle works, oftentimes it looks as if you can have this big improvement in a year's time. I was in an almost perfect situation for learning improvement. Faculty who wanted to improve, who worked really quickly trying to get together and collaborate and being very thoughtful about the process. And that was somewhere between 2 and 2.5 years before we could show improvement. That was everything working out about as well as it could. So I just want to give you perspective on that. Because often, right, like, let me give you some context. You find out the score is 2.5 in 2014. It's probably going to take a couple of semesters just to plan out what your strategy is about the intervention. Y'all get me there? Like, let's talk as a faculty. What is the issue? What is the problem? Let's strategize together, and then, you know, if you're lucky, it is intervening the next year. So, you know, then maybe in the class of 2016, in this case, that you might see improvement. Okay. So again, here's a simple model. Are y'all with me on those 3 examples? Again, we're not going into anything sophisticated at all here. We're just talking on the very macro sense. Remember that question we asked before? Why aren't we seeing enough improvement? Like, those are 3 big reasons, and they hit a lot upon the things that you all were saying. Yes?
What also happens a lot is that, yes, it's going to take 2, 3, 4 years
Mm. Yeah, I heard a JCurve over there. Is that right? Oh yeah.
I was saying that I think a lot of times what happens is since we don't see that immediate improvement, then we give up on whatever it is that we're doing. The changes that we're working, we give them up because it's not working within 3 semesters or within a year. So we don't really give it a chance to see if there is improvement there.
Can you say your name and your program too?
Oh yes, I'm Sylvia Quinana Silva from Dual Enrollment.
Oh, great. Thanks, Sylvia. Any other comments? I thought originally you were saying the J curve as well. And so that's a phenomenon with change management sometimes. And that is that if you start off here and then you try to change things, it becomes uncomfortable. And actually sometimes the outcomes are worse. But then over time that they go up. And so I think that can happen at the program level with learning just as it would maybe in a sport. And so I think about the J curve and like I used to play tennis a lot. So you play tennis and you get to a certain level. I was like, okay, I'm pretty competitive. And then you see a pro and you're like, your backhand is really screwed up. And so then you start working on your backhand. And then when you first start working on your backhand, it's going to be bad. You are not going to be as good as you were with your bad form. But then when you practice with a good form, eventually it gets better. So that's the issue. You got to be pretty patient with it too. So thank you for that comment. Okay, so we talked a little bit about some ways that the simple model could break down, and you talked about the issue with the time too. This is a great launching point. There's a million different ways the simple model can break down. We just gave a few of them. So spend a little time at your table talking about other ways the simple model can break down. Okay, there's some great discussions going on, but let's come back to the front. Okay, can I get another example about how the simple model can break down?
They require different kinds of feedings.
Oh, different pigs have different
Metabolisms.
different pigs have different types of metabolisms. Okay, yeah, that's fair, right?
We had also talked about how in the original analogy, weigh pig, feed pig, weighed pig, it's the same pig.
Yeah.
But in the multi-year change model, you're looking at different cohorts across time, and often incoming classes are higher performing than previous classes, just naturally. And so you have to be able to assess, I think, within person change across the course of the curriculum, as well as between person change across multiple years.
Yeah, did everybody hear that one? That's a really good criticism, because in the past, so basically what she's saying is we've been in this utopian world of methodology where we can say that the students coming into this program at this particular cohort are almost identical in characteristics to this cohort. But in reality, especially with small programs, you have a ton of changes in sort of the quality of the different students that come in. So when you do see a change or let's say an improvement in results, can you attribute that improvement to a change in the program, or is it due to characteristics of the students, the cohort? Did I capture that accurately? So thank you for that comment.
I think what we discussed a little bit was about the changes within the department or within the unit, meaning if we already have a group of faculty who already bought into the assessment, but then somebody retires, they leave, they go to another job, and then we have to rehire new people or hire new people and then ask them to buy into the assessment again.
Yeah, that's such a great comment. So this idea that you have to worry about personnel changes too. So I'll share an example that we had at our own institution, that we had this amazing learning improvement proposal written by somebody who was a real leader in the program. Not an official leader, not the department head, but somebody who everybody respected. And guess what? That person then opted out, and then we're left with this big initiative with no real champion to it. And then all of a sudden, it got fracted. So that's a very real issue. Also, things like, if you do have a department head change, then it's like, what's the priority, right? So there's all kinds of changes in personnel that make it difficult to do big program level changes. That's a great example. I saw a couple other hands go up.
We talked about, and these are, Pat came up with some of these, in terms of lack of consistency, yes, the staff and faculty turnover, sometimes you have adjuncts, you have differences in sections. We talked about that at FIU. We have a curricular change process that's sometimes glacial in how long it takes to put things into effect. We also talked about standards changes within the disciplines that might mitigate changes that are required by the discipline that have to take place. Program priority changes, catalog issues that we have with, students have to be according to the catalog that they came in with, and if you make changes after, that affects them, you can't really work too much around that. But one of the things I also wanted to piggyback on what was said before.
Best pun of the day, by the way.
Okay.
But there's going to be a prize for the best pun, by the way, so I'm glad it naturally came up.
Yeah. Okay. So to piggyback, it's not only that maybe the students are better, but maybe your teaching force is better. So, or maybe you have more effective teachers, or maybe you did something with instructional that wasn't part of your change, but it might have been a university-wide thing, or maybe everybody went to the Center for the Advancement of Teaching, Center for, I don't know their acronym. So we have a Center for Advancement of Teaching that does wonderful things on our campus, and maybe there was some initiative that people went through, and it changes the teaching for those particular courses that you're assessing. Right. So there's a lot of variability in the real world.
Yeah, so a ton of things that were brought up there. One of the pieces is just sort of the structural mechanisms that the university has in place to enact even changes, right? It's pretty slow, and sometimes, I guess in some ways there's good reason for that you want to make sure that the changes are verified, but boy, it can make it a slow process. Okay, what else? Are we good? Okay. I think the point being is, I'm going to use a word again. We're in a learning system. And we have to think about how all those pieces fit together. This is another reason that I think administrative support is really important for learning improvement. So to have somebody who can think through all the processes one might have to go through, or a unit would have to go through, sometimes you need somebody who's been in those kinds of positions to see some things. Okay. So we're going to look at that a particular type of problem that we talk about it as a level problem at JMU. I think you're going to appreciate this problem. By the way, my dad was a nuclear engineer, and so I sort of had that engineer mindset. So in my mind, I always try to model things, and knowing that all models are wrong, some are useful kind of piece. But this helps me think about one of the big problems with learning improvement. I think we might be running out of juice here. There we go. Does anybody have access to the keyboard? All right, this is really sweet coming up, so be prepared. What's underneath that box? Who knows? Okay, maybe I'm just pointing it the wrong direction. I never realized the computer was there. I thought it was here, so no wonder it's been slow. So my apologies. I was like clicking at a wooden desk as opposed to the actual computer. Okay, let me try it again. Okay, is this me working it? Okay. So you all saw the really simple model that I had. I'm going to go one step up in complexity, and I'm going to be talking about the sort of interaction between faculty, the courses they teach, and the student learning outcomes. So I'm going to represent faculty in different circles. So the bigger the circle, the more effective they are with respect to teaching a particular student learning outcome. Let me make that clear. I'm not saying that if I label a faculty member as being a small circle, I'm not saying they're ineffective overall. I'm just saying that they're ineffective with respect to teaching that particular student learning outcome. I'm also going to ask you all this question. Have you ever been put in a position that you were asked to teach something that you had very little expertise in? Yeah, I've been there many times before. I taught a stats class and I was like, man, I hope no student in there can figure out what my weaknesses is, because like I have no depth beyond what I'm putting on the slide, right? And so this is just like one section of that class, but I think most people have been in that situation before. So in that case, this was I was not very effective at that one student learning outcome. I'm also going to talk about students, but as opposed to the efficacy of teaching, which we're talking about with the faculty, with students, we're going to talk about their proficiency with their student learning outcome. So if we're going back to the writing example, if we're going back to the writing, so a low proficiency, that's a student who is not a very good writer at all, to high proficiency, that's a student who you're really proud about with respect to the quality of their writing. Okay? So we're modeling both the faculty effectiveness in teaching and also the student proficiency. So I'm going to walk you through some models here. So you see that circle up there? It says faculty 1. So that represents one faculty member. And by the way, the size of that circle is pretty big. And you see those students up top? So these are students who are going into that section of that class that that faculty member teaches, and they're all L's. That means they're all small learning proficiency. They're not very good writers. So here's what happens. These students go into this section. Something magical happens, and the color changes. And they come out with moderate proficiency. Like, this is pretty great, right? So this is just one set of students going through one section of one faculty member's class, and the faculty member tends to be pretty high. Now, why did I put moderate proficiency instead of high here? What's that? Yeah, right, because they started with the low learning. And writing is one of those areas where no matter how good of a teacher you are, you're not going to be able to take a student from 0 to Ernest Hemingway in a class. Right? It's going to take a number of classes to, anywhere approximate that. For argument's sake, I'm going to say it takes 2 courses, okay? So these students go into this class taught by faculty member, another one, we'll call it faculty member 4. In class 102, something magical happens again and they come out high. Again, this is really simplistic, but it's the idea of if you've got a really important student learning outcome, it often takes really good teaching coordinated together to produce the kind of outcomes that you would like. And so something that I call this piece is, see how faculty 1 and faculty 4, how they're vertically associated with each other? This is vertical alignment. So not only are both of these faculty members really good at teaching writing, but they are also coordinated together. This is challenging. So faculty member 4 needs to know what faculty member 1 covered and vice versa. And so they're a dynamic duo, vertically aligned. Now, FIU is a really big institution. So is it the case where for most classes it's just one faculty member in one section? You guys are shaking their head. It's usually a ton of sections for each course and different faculty members teaching them, right? So I'm going to still be in fantasy land here, but it's just a little bit bigger fantasy land. Okay, so here you have class 101. You got sections A, B, and C, and you got faculty members 1, 2, and 3. Everybody with me there? All right. Okay, now look at this. This is glorious. These students go in there. Maybe there is. Okay, here we go. So the magical happens, and they come out moderate. Then they come down to the next class, 3 sections, 3 different faculty members, and this happens. Now, why is this situation more complicated than the one before it? Yeah, now you got 6 faculty members. There could be varying proficiency levels to the outcome. And as you were saying with the 6 faculty members, you also have to have this horizontal alignment plus the vertical alignment. Everybody with me there? How challenging is that to get all those people on the same page, right, to work together on it? So what do you think I'm going to throw up here next? Let's go from fantasy land to one that's more realistic, okay? So somebody tell me, what's the difference between what you're seeing here in the last slide? So maybe you got 2 adjuncts, really smart people coming from the field, but their prep is, here's a PowerPoint deck, go at it, right? Or oftentimes, too, again, I was given a situation where I'm a tenured faculty member. I got put in a situation where I was teaching something that I just wasn't as skilled at as some of my colleagues, right? So it could be any number of factors. So you have these pieces. This is a good time. I want to give you about 2 minutes just to make the predictions at your own table. What do you think is going to happen? So again, these students are going to flow down from here, these students here, and these students here. What's your prediction? Okay, I'm hearing section C is going to have the most improvement. Everybody with me on that one? Okay, so let's go. Let's see what happens here. Something different happened, right? A little shaking action. Not as good as a color change. And yeah, was that what you predicted? Okay.
There are some self-motivated students, so maybe a few M's.
Maybe a few M's, yeah, maybe a few M's in there. Again, it's still a simple model, even more complicated than it was. And then I'm going to throw in the class 102, okay? And we're going to assume that these students are going to go down vertically here. Okay, so let's go for this set here. What do you think is going to happen here? They're going to stay the same. Why? Yeah. So these folks, they, for no fault of their own, the students just ended up pulling the short straws out, right? What do you think is going to happen here with this first set? Okay, maybe a little bit more mixed there. And then how about this last one? Okay, stay at moderate. Okay. Again, there's no real answer here. These are all hypothetical models that came up in Keston's head, right? But hopefully it helps us think about these systems a little bit better. Okay. Okay, so that's what happened here, right? So you've got a situation where this faculty member wasn't very effective. This one's moderately. You get some mixed results here. These guys, as you pointed out, they just hit faculty, weren't comfortable teaching writing, either section. And this one, it was like, hey, we're lucky that they retained the knowledge they gained after the first instructor, right? So this is still a really simple model. What way is real life more complicated than this? I just asked this to the group. Yeah, only 12 students, right? So these are all small sections. What else? Yeah, students come with varying degrees. So the way that I set that up is that all these students are really similar coming in, right? And sometimes too, I mean, this can go the other way around too. Sometimes you have students who come in that already have really good skills. So what's the value add in the class sometimes? What else?
Sometimes there is a time gap between class 1 and class 2. They take another class and then they come back to the time.
Oh yeah, so there's issues that some students might take class 101 in the fall, and the next spring they might take class 102. Sometimes it doesn't work out as well as that. There might be a huge gap in between, or gassed. For some reason, student takes class 102 first, then class 101. Right? So it's really hard to come up with an intervention when the timing shifts around, there's big gaps between them. Yeah, great. What else? I think some of y'all commented on this. I'll just say it out loud. That actually the thinking through that the students just fall into columns and vertically, like they're all mixed often. It depends on the program. Sometimes they're that structured in programs, but often that's not the case. Now, theoretically, if students mixed back and forth, and you had that scenario where everybody's a big circle, it doesn't matter, does it? So what I find is, so far, of every technique I've tried to use to explain learning improvement in any complexity, this actually is the most useful to people. And the reason is that they can kind of say, oh, I get it. Like, we're trying to affect all students in the program. And if this program is kind of small, and it was those 36 students altogether, it means you have to work through having the right dosage applied effectively across time and have that coordination. So it helps to sort of strategize visually about what it would take to get there. Okay. So here's where we want to go, right? We want to go from programs like this. And by the way, you have better outcomes in this program than when students came in, right? It's just not optimized to what it could be. So we're trying to get from that set of outcomes to that outcomes. So what's also something I want to point out, the assessment office here, oftentimes what happens is we only see the outcomes at the end with no idea of the mechanics that came before it to produce those outcomes. And so when you separate results from the mechanics that underlie it, it's going to be really tough to know why you got the results you did. So how can we achieve this improvement? How can we make the program curriculum coherent? How can all faculty deliver the curriculum effectively? And how can assessment capture program level improvement? So these are all kinds of questions we have to think about at this macro strategy level. Okay. Everybody with me? Y'all in the back of the room, you talked about some center you have on campus that helps with teaching. Can you remind me what that's called? Center for Advancement of Teaching, CAT, I assume people call it, right? So you got CAT here. So I'm gonna mention something about CAT and related offices. So one thing that we noticed is a program level problem. This is institutional, okay? This is the way that institutions are not set up to support student learning improvement. They have a lot of the right parts, they're just not put together well. So at the program level, what we're looking at is this. But an individual faculty member, what does he or she usually care about? The individual section he or she teaches, right? So again, when we talk about assessment, we're often just looking at those outcomes without any idea of the mechanics that gave us those outcomes. On the other hand, with your CAT, you know what the CATs do often? They help get these circles bigger with respect to teaching something. But often what happens is these two units on campus operate at different levels. So assessment is happening at the academic degree program level, sometimes the institution level. But when people are getting help with being able to teach better, like going to CAT and getting those services, they're just doing it at their individual sections. So one of the things that I think needs to happen at different institutions is having this merger between assessment and educational development. So as opposed to just the educational development happening for single faculty on individual sections, is having that educational development opportunity where it's groups of faculty working together with common program outcomes. Because that's the intervention piece, right? I mean, that's the part that you have to get the faculty strategizing better together to feed the pig better. So at our institution, we call it learning improvement by design. It doesn't matter what you call it, but the idea is that you're assessing and you're intervening at the same level. Okay, everybody with me on that? Okay, so we're going to take a break in just a second, but I'm going to have to share a story with you. Does anybody mind if I tell a PG-13 story? Okay. How many of you all are familiar with the show Breaking Bad? Okay, so a few people. So let me give you the premise for it. So you have a high school chemistry teacher who's an amazing chemist in his own right. In fact, he's a world-class chemist. And he's diagnosed with cancer. And as anybody would be, he's pretty down. His life expectancy is not very long. I think it's a year or two. And so he thinks, you know, what am I going to do? And he's really concerned about his family because cancer costs a lot of money. And their savings and their family is probably going to go to his cancer treatment. And so by happenstance, he runs into a former student of his who dropped out of high school, but is actually making pretty good money. But he's making pretty good money by selling crystal meth. And so the chemistry teacher says, well, you know what? Like, I know something about chemistry, and there seems to be a decent amount of chemistry with crystal meth, so maybe you know, I can get involved with that. This is the portion of the story where I'm going to have you repeat after me just to make sure my message is clear, okay? And then I'll tell the rest of the story. So repeat after me. Keston Fulcher does not endorse crystal meth. Okay, this is not about a crystal meth story, it's about learning improvement, but I'll get to that in a second. So he's like, you know, I'm a world-class chemist, and it seems to me that these people who are actually the bakers of crystal meth, or the cooks, that they don't really have that much expertise in chemistry, so maybe I can do a better job. And so at the time, on the street, the purity of crystal meth is something like 70% at the time, okay? And so Dr. White tries something. He's like, well, I'll try a batch. And he makes his batch of crystal meth. And is it good? It's the best. So as opposed to 70% pure, it's like 97% pure. And so this is the best stuff. Now, now he's thinking, man, I've got it made. I have the best quality crystal meth out there. I am going to make a fortune. Did he immediately make a fortune? No. Why? Because there was a second part, or second problem he had to solve, which was tougher than the first problem. So the first problem is making crystal meth is effective, and he made the most effective. The second piece was the distribution piece. What happened is there was already a huge amount of infrastructure on the street pushing other people's crystal meth. So in Breaking Bad, it's 6 seasons long. The first half of season 1, he cooks the best meth. The rest of it, 5.5 seasons, is just figuring out the distribution problem. And so they did all kinds of ways. They said, well, hey, let me get these low-level drug dealers out there. Well, that didn't work. So then he tried to partner with the establishment to get that crystal meth. That sort of worked, but then eventually a lot of people were killed. Then he goes out on his own, and he eventually dies because crystal meth is not a good thing to do. But the reason I point this out is that if you're thinking about learning improvement, there's a couple big strategies that you got to think about. One strategy is actually having interventions that are effective. So what are the things that would be done differently in the classroom that would actually move the needle in the student learning outcome that you want to improve? Okay, so if it's writing, what could be done differently than what's being done now that's more effective at helping out writing? But then the second piece is, if you are a lone wolf faculty member and you changed up your section, okay, you got the best crystal meth, but it's not on the streets, right? So how do you get your crystal meth out on the streets? Now, I know that's a terrible analogy, and I know everybody's gonna be like, Keston's a crystal meth pusher. I'm not. But I just think it's interesting to think about. Even having the right strategy that works is not, or the right intervention that works is not enough. You got to figure out how to get it out to other people. And that's actually where my research is right now. I'm most interested in those group dynamics. After you found out the interventions that work, what are the best way to work with faculty members or staff members in a way that can get them to work together? By the way, the solution I'm going for isn't being like telling faculty exactly what they have to do. In fact, that's probably the worst thing you could do. It's about figuring out how to get them to come together, giving them the space, and giving them a process by which they can work together. That makes sense to everybody? And let me just kind of go back, because I've given it not enough time, but a lot of these issues are coming on the administrative side as well. And so let me give you an administrative example of this. A school might be concerned about retention rate. That's a really complicated problem. So there's a lot of schools out there that have got plans about, here's what we're doing to address our retention problems. Or here's they will say, quote unquote, our improvements to help out retention problems. But it's only an improvement when the retention rates are actually higher and you can attribute it. And retention is a good example as well, that it's not even one unit on campus that can help out with that. That's a lot of different units and a lot of different people have to coordinate with each other. So just trying to give you an example of, whether it's a student learning outcome or it's more of like an input-output issue within an institution, all those pieces have components of this improvement issue. Assess, intervene, reassess, and had that issue of finding out not only what is effective, but how to scale that efficacy up to the level that you need it to be. Okay. So let's see. Let's spend about. You okay with maybe 10 more minutes and like a 5-minute break and coming back? Are y'all okay with that? Can y'all hang? Okay. So a few minutes ago, you mentioned CAT here at FIU, and that's the area for educational development to help faculty become better instructors. And this is something that oftentimes is not talked about in assessment, something that we need to bring together. So just out of curiosity, how many of you all have interfaced with CAT in here? Okay, so quite a number of people. Okay, so maybe almost half. And so for some of you, this is not going to be new at all. For some of you, it will be new, but the idea is this type of information is rarely talked in conjunction with assessment. Assessment conversation is usually about methodology and less about the getting up the faculty development. So a big name in faculty development is a person named D. Fink. And D. Fink's got a really great book on educational development. And his whole thing is designing courses for significant learning. Now this is courses, not programs, but the same sort of mindset applies. So he says you have to think about 3 big situational factors. And so one is the learning goals. We talked about that already, student learning outcomes. That's what assessment and educational development share. It's also feedback and assessment, and it's also the teaching and learning activities. And I think what's really cool is this is really integrating all the parts of the learning improvement model. It's just in educational development, they usually talk about it with respect to an individual course. And here's some things that we have to think about. Consideration of situational factors. So this is class size, students' prior knowledge. When we had a discussion a little earlier ago, remember how you were talking about how the different cohorts can change so much, the different factors can change? That's what they're talking about here, those situational factors, is that like you would never probably have the exact same class done twice because you have to recognize a little bit of variation that you have in your students, and sometimes it's a lot of variation. Creation of learning goals. what do you hope students will know, think, or do in 5 years after the course? This, again, is very similar to assessment, right? And here's where they overlap as much. The difference is this is thinking about it from the context of a learning piece. We got feedback and assessment, teaching and learning activities, and it's also this integration piece. And this is hard to do. Integration of all these components is hard to do in an individual section of a course you teach. You know, how this relates to learning improvement is we're trying to get this done at the program level. So the integration becomes, I would say, exponentially more difficult. Not that it's impossible, but you just have to think through it. Okay. And then a few other pieces too. So, people have different opinions about this. Most teaching and learning centers like CAT will usually talk more about active learning techniques. Now, I, for one, just to be clear, I've seen some amazing lecturers who I've gone through and learned a lot. However, literature shows that on the whole, typically active learning will work best in many types of outcomes. So anyway, they have the passive learning and active learning, and make the differentiation between that. And so, is everybody with me on that model? So it's about steps to course design. Here's this idea of some passive learning and some active learning. And maybe as a group, we can spend just a few minutes talking about how the course redesign efforts connect with program assessment efforts on campus. Like, is there any integration that's being done now between the two offices?
Yes, we've had different workshops with them before, and have similar approaches to
Okay, so this is great. Catherine, thanks for sharing that. This is a good move in the right direction. That oftentimes they are, and this is not being a cut at FIU, it's just saying in general, these two offices are usually miles apart, like literally on different sides of the campus, and oftentimes just figuratively as well. They don't operate very well together. So, but kind of merging those two is really tough.
Oh, sorry. Here we go. I have a microphone right next to me. Yes, we have collaborated in the past. It depends on the time period we're at. When we are busy doing due dates, we sometimes don't collaborate as much. But we have had common workshops where we've each presented on our pieces, and we do try to give a similar message across the board.
Mm-hmm.
I also just wanted to add really quickly, even if they do have collaboration, CAT's or interaction with CAT, it's voluntary from faculty.
Yeah, so she's saying that it's often voluntary to only faculty who go there versus oftentimes with assessment. Now, these are about the friendliest people you'll ever meet in an assessment office, and many of y'all know that. But a lot of what assessment offices are created to do is compliance. Like we've got our SAC COC, our regional accreditor, and they basically take federal mandates and they translate it into what every institution wants to do. So at a minimum, we have to do assessment. But I think what we're saying here is like, well, why couldn't we do it in a way that would help students learn better too? We fight that, by the way, too, that oftentimes our office is known as the assessment police. And I was like, let me be the learning improvement police guy, Okay. Any other comments? Okay. So let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back with a few closing comments. And also, I want to make sure we have a decent amount of time for some Q&A. So I know that a lot of thoughts have been going on. I want to make sure it's pretty interactive. So let's take a 5-minute break and come back. Thanks. Okay, y'all ready? This is the last segment here. I want to share with you a real life example, and then I'll show you some resources that we've got, or point you to some resources, and then open it up for Q&A for probably 15 or 20 minutes. So let me arm you with a question that will make people feel uncomfortable sometimes. So oftentimes when I go to assessment conferences, I'll see people speak to learning improvement. And here's a question that actually I don't ask, but I think is appropriate to ask. For this, I want to arm you with it. And they say, hey, we think assessment should be used for improvement. The question that can be asked is, what example do you have at your own university where you have program level improvement? And hopefully they have one, but you'll likely hear crickets. Now, the reason I say that is because if you're going to talk a big game about learning improvement, you should have some practice doing it and have some real live examples. And so at JMU, I can say we don't have nearly as many learning improvement examples as we would like, but we've had a lot of people working really hard on learning improvement, including faculty, our educational development office, and our assessment office. So I'd like to tell you about one of our best examples. And I'm just going to let you know this actually talks about the degree of improvement as well, okay? So let me lay this out for you. A few years ago, our educational development office and my office got together and said, we want to try a program level learning improvement project. And we began by putting out a request for proposals. So we just asked programs around campus, who would be interested in improving something important in your program? And you got to make the case to us about why this thing is important and why you think the faculty in your program are going to collaborate to the extent that's actually going to have improvement at the program level. So if you note, I like the way this starts out. Our educational development director's idea was like, let's make it an RFP. That way the faculty will argue to us about why they want to improve something. And they have to sort of get together and come to agreement this is something they wanted to do. So we got a few proposals, and one of them was from a program called Computer Information Systems. So this is a program that sits in our College of Business, but it's sort of between IT and business is this program. And what students do, or one of their student learning outcomes, is something called requirement elicitation interviewing. That's a lot of words, and I'll break that down for you. So what students in this program have to do is eventually when they graduate, they have to talk to business owners or managers in business, and they have to understand why their current system is not working the way they want it to work. This is the owner of the business. Think about what the new system should look like, the needs of the new system, and then help them build that new system. So this might be a database. Like they've got a database that doesn't work very well. They want to create a new database. But what they're dealing with is, Barbara, is that right? So imagine Barbara's the business owner. So she is awesome at knowing her business, but she may not be that technical. So she might not know a lot about databases. So it's my job to hear what she needs well in order for me to build a good system. So imagine this scenario. Imagine that if I come in as a computer information systems person and I'm really technical, I know how to build things, but what happens if I don't listen to Barbara very well? It's not going to work. It's not going to work well, is it? I mean, it might be some fancy gizmo, but it may not meet Barbara's foundational needs. So you can see why this piece is so important for those students to have. So anyway, the CIS program, they submit a successful proposal. We work with them, and we'll work with them a lot. And so we do a few things. One is we spend a lot of time thinking through what does a good requirement elicitations interview look like. It's defining that construct of interest. We spent a lot of time doing that. In fact, we took our ideas out to industry and had their feedback on that. So we created an instrument, a rubric. We trained on it and so forth. Also, this was a stroke of genius on their part, is we were finishing up our rubric, before we did any interventions, we had our students were about ready to graduate. We had them do a mock requirement elicitation interview. And we videotaped them. We got IRB permission to do that. The students signed off on it. We showed this video of the students doing their interviewing. And when we show it to people, you know what they do? People often laugh. That's how bad the interviewing is. The faculty member who led this up, Diane Lending, would say, yeah, this is almost comical. But it's not funny when you think about it, because these are the kinds of skills that these students are having when they come out. And what's interesting is that in different classes, when students practice pieces of this problem, they were actually pretty good at it. Just these students never had that opportunity to practice the real life skills. And she said, when you see those students, those are some of the students in our program who are making A's. These are some of our best students. This is not, in this case, it's not our students' fault. This is our fault for a program for not thinking through it well enough. Like, how brave is that for a faculty member to say that? But it was easier to say when she had the post-assessment results, because they did this humongous intervention where they had all their program faculty, pretty small program, together working for a week, thinking through how they were going to scaffold their new interventions through several courses and then implement them. So they did planning for a year, they implemented, and then this is the difference between years. So blue is year one, okay, and there's 8 different areas in that rubric. And the second year, after the interventions, are in the red. And so in essence, students went from, on average, developing skills in the 2015 cohort to competent skills in the 2016 cohort. And for those of you who are methodologists, this is actually a 3 standard deviation change between the students at that time. I mean, one of the reasons that the growth was so big is because they had never done real life practice of the skills. It had always just been in segments. And so when they put it all together, you can see this dramatic growth from students. The other piece that I'll mention about how you go from here to here, this is not a half-hour intervention, folks. This is probably 50 hours of different intervention, not all in the classroom, right? There's a lot of what students did outside the class. But it was the strength and the length and the coordination of that intervention was enough to move that needle. So I want to show you, that's an example of a successful intervention. The other thing to say too is you see videos of students at both times, and it doesn't take a Cohen's D to show that it's a big difference. It's qualitatively different. You just tell they know how to introduce themselves. They know how to give an overview. They know how to provide visualization a lot better. So I just want to give you an example. That was a real life example. And the next piece I'm going to show you is I'm going to some tools for you. And in the toolkit that I want to show you, we actually have an article written up about this, this program if you want to read it. Okay. So what you're going to get in a toolkit, and perhaps Eileen will share this with you. This can go to anybody here at FIU, but there's a few things that I'll provide you. So one is the RFP example. So you might say, like, if my program actually wanted to do a learning improvement effort, what things do my colleagues and I have to think through in order to do that? So that's just an example. That's something that we've got there. We've also got pitch slides. So earlier on, I deputized you all to be learning improvement police, okay? I think it's really good to get the message out, not in a mean way, but in a nicer way about learning improvement. So if you wanted to make a pitch to faculty or staff in your own offices, there's some pitch slides that you can use and modify to make the pitch for people to talk about learning improvement. We have an action plan worksheet, and we've also got PowerPoints. In addition, I have a number of articles that you can read that are more in depth too. So what my hope is this morning is that you all got a really good sense of what learning improvement is, that you can distinguish it from a change, that you have a sense of how that model can break down, and the things that you have to think through. So what I'm hoping is I gave you a little bit of a launching pad to think more effectively about learning improvement in your own programs and units. So with that being said, oh man, come on. I literally need one more click, right? Let's see if I can get it. Let's go. So let's go to questions. What kind of questions do you have? Yeah.
Okay, so being the devil's advocate and the negative Nilly, you showed an example, very successful, of a single learning outcome in a program that a lot of effort went into, and I'm sure it was a very important learning outcome. But what you also need to show is that it didn't detract from the other outcomes, because we can't just keep adding more and more and more and more. You can't add 50 hours to instruction without taking away from other instruction and other activities, right?
So that's a great question to say, gosh, we're focusing on something else, but if that's 50 additional hours, what are we going to lose as a result of doing that? So let me respond to that in two ways. So one is that these faculty talked about what they want students to learn, and that was a critical student learning outcome, and they were willing to sacrifice some other things to ensure that outcome was prioritized. So that's A. B is that it wasn't the case that requirement elicitation wasn't covered at all in the program. In fact, it had been. It just hadn't been sort of strategized and scaffolded to get them to do the real life experience. So, I would have to talk to the faculty members there, but my sense is that, yes, there were some things that had to go to the curb with respect to time, but most of it wasn't a cannibalization issue. Most of it was a restructuring of how they were teaching requirement elicitation. But that's also why, do you remember I said they had a week to think about this together as a group? And one of the reasons it takes a week to think about it is because you really have to, once you start tweaking things, there's a lot of downstream effects to it too. So you really have to think through that curriculum. I mean, that's a great question to bring up, and we're honest about that. Like, it's going to be a big commitment, and you have to think through how this affects your entire curriculum. Thanks for that question. Great one. What other question?
Any questions?
Oh, another question back there. Oh, well, tell me. Actually, if you can give the microphone back to her. Let's take the consulting out of there. Like, tell me what you're thinking about. Like, what would help you and your program out?
Well, actually, I have a separate dietetics track that I have standards for, and I have to account to the national organization. On top of that, I also do the SACS assessment with Kathy.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a little overwhelming because it's not my field. So these kinds of workshops are really helping me.
Yeah.
And Kathy's office is wonderful. So.
Yeah, I think, again, not just because they're sitting there, but I've had an opportunity to talk with Kathy and her team for a while, and I'm really impressed with their sort of their ability to look forward and seeing how they can provide better service to the units, and also thinking about, where's next to go. I mean, by the way, just getting all units to submit assessment reports is really challenging, but then thinking about the bigger question to say, how can we add value to the different programs that are out there? That's really where learning improvement comes in. And this, by the way, when I give this presentation at SAC-COC, people are saying, well, Keston, this doesn't help me with the particular requirements I have to do right now. I was like, it's not about this. It's about what we should be doing in higher ed. And so one of the things that our office is working on a lot is on sort of a train-the-trainer model. So, like, I would hate for the situation to be that if Trudy Bonta were to do a study in 2026, and if we still only had 6% learning improvement, that's bad. Like, the only way that we can get to a place that's further than that is to have folks who are willing to sort of take on the learning improvement mantle, and from wherever perspective they are, whether it's assessment, whether they are a faculty leader, whether they are administrator, to work on the problem. Ma'am.
My name's Ming, and I'm a faculty member in the English department, but I also work for a program called Writing Across Curriculum. in which we help faculty members across the discipline to integrate writing assignment to improve learning outcomes. So just now you mentioned in your presentation that oftentimes there is a separation between program assessment and faculty development. And then that's something we actually hope to do within our program. So we do faculty development, educating or working with faculty members to help them better their learning outcomes using writing assignments. But at the same time, we also hope to do the program assessment. So I was just wondering whether for our program, which can do both, do you have any suggestions for best practices? Because we actually struggle with both.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, they're both really tough. I don't know if this is a devil's advocate story, but I'm going to kind of go from your perspective to say, let me tell you how it doesn't work, okay? Because most of the good ideas and techniques I have is because I've once been on a committee or did something that didn't work. And then you're like, well, if I had to do it over again, what might that look like? So at JMU a few years ago, we did our so-called QEP, Quality Enhancement Plan. And so you have to choose a student learning area that you want all students at your university to get better at. Okay, that's at least how the QEP was framed. And so we chose ethical reasoning. And overall, it was the best project I've ever worked on. And I learned a lot. I contributed a lot. Our students are a little bit better at ethical reasoning than they were 6 years ago, but it could have been a lot better. We could have been a lot more effective. And kind of going to your point, one thing that we did with the QEP is that we had a curriculum committee work on ethical reasoning, and we had an assessment committee working on ethical reasoning. You know how much overlap there was between committee members? 0. Like, there's no way you're going to get the weigh pig, feed pig, weigh pig model if your feeding and your weighing are disconnected from one another. And so when you said that your group is working on both of those pieces, the curriculum piece and the assessment, you were in such a great position to think through these pieces. And so I guess how I would frame it is this, suggestions I would have is I think people move too fast, too quickly in thinking about the intervention before they come to some agreement about the student learning outcome per se. And so that's one thing that really helped us out in subsequent projects was having the assessment folks really help people iterate towards articulating a student learning outcome that everybody could live with. And then from there to say, when the curriculum is being built, it was always, how does this part of the curriculum or this part of teacher training actually correspond back to a piece of that student learning outcome? And so it was always trying to think about that system and is it integrated with one another. So if I could sum up my suggestion in a word, it is think carefully about the integration. Great question. Thank you. Anybody else? It could be devil advocates. Mean as can be. I actually like that because I'd rather people say what their concerns are and be able to address it. Or it could be like, man, this is sweet. And I was like, yeah, cool. Any other final question? Okay, thank you. This is sweet, yeah. Thanks so much, y'all, for having me. And I thank the assessment team most of all. All right, well, I guess it's about time for lunch, right? So enjoy.